Forward march to Ugly House, forward march. Calliste march against oppression, forward march. Now Grenadians of all the nation, end of misery and oppression. So we build Grenada full with our song. Forward march, forward march. Forward march against imperialism. Forward march, forward march. Forward march to Ugly House, forward march. Calliste march against oppression, forward march. Now Grenadians of all the nation, end of misery and oppression. So we build Grenada full with our song. Forward march, forward march. Forward march against imperialism. Forward march, forward march. Forward march against imperialism. March upon for federation, forward march. We all fight for liberation, forward march. Now Grenadians across the nation, end of misery and oppression. So we fill Grenada full with our song. Forward march, forward march. Forward march against imperialism. Forward march, forward march. Forward march against imperialism. We have fought colonialism, forward march. We will fight imperialism, forward march. Now Grenadians of all the nation, end of misery and oppression. So we build Grenada full with our song. Forward march, forward march. Forward march against imperialism. Forward march, forward march. Forward march against imperialism. We the workers fight for justice, forward march. In this struggle we are united, forward march. For now will be upon the nation. We end corruption and oppression. And we build Grenada with the very hand. Forward march, forward march. Forward march against imperialism. Forward march, forward march. Forward march against imperialism. Forward!
Good evening and welcome everyone. My name is Ruggles Ferguson, a member of the Grenada Revolution Celebrations Committee. and also of chairman of GREMFO, Grenada Revolution Memorial Foundation, one of the partners in this exercise. First of all, let me apologize for the delayed start. We were actually hoping to start very promptly, but this is the first virtual event of this kind, and lots of logistics involved and technical issues. And I hope we have dealt with most of them and the remainder of the program can run smoothly. So my task this evening is a relatively simple one: to welcome all of you to the special 42nd anniversary celebrations of the Grenada Revolution, March 13th, 1979, the first revolution in the English-speaking Caribbean. And as we constantly say, irrespective of the views that some may have of it, it is part of our history, an integral part of our history. And it is important that we learn from the events, and especially there were many positives in the revolution. There were many programs in the revolution that today, if implemented, can make a major difference in the lives of especially poor and vulnerable people. And you would hear much more about that as the program evolves and unfolds. Our first item, in fact, the anthem, the national anthem, let me indicate, was played by a teenager, Oxy Redhead, the daughter of Debbie and Flyers Redhead. In fact, during the revolution, Flyers was one of the journalists at the Free West Indian newspaper. He's not enjoying the best of health now, but that was his daughter, Oxy, on the violin. So we have a packed program before us today, and what I want to do is to just lay out some of the ground rules for this first ever virtual forum. We have had physical forums over the last 5 years. In particular, GRENFO introduced a March 13th lecture series. The first was delivered by Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit in 2017. The second by Dr. Ralph Gonzalez, Prime Minister St. Vincent and the Grenadines in 2018. And for the 40th anniversary of the revolution, the special March 13th lecture was delivered by Dr. Kenny Anthony, former Prime Minister of St. Lucia. Last year, because of COVID and the challenges, we did not have any March 13th lecture series. And this year, in spite of COVID, and despite all the challenges presented by COVID, we have chosen the virtual platform to reach our friends not only in Grenada, but throughout the diaspora. And for this activity, members of the committee, in fact, came from literally all over the world, from the major centers, Toronto, New York, London, and we have even as far as Germany. And as I can see already, we have many folks on from every corner of the world. So the major activity this evening, of course, is the forum, the panel, under the theme Celebrating the Grenada Revolution in the Times of COVID, focusing on health, education, and the economy. And for this, we have a powerful three-member panel comprised of Dr. Sonia Nixon, a public health specialist, and one of the first students in September 1979 to journey to Cuba to study medicine. Among the first batch of students, we also have Dr. Brian Francis, a former permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance and senior lecturer at the University of the West Indies, and Dr. Anne Hicklin Hudson, all the way in Australia. In fact, it's way past midnight in Australia now. And we have Dr. Anne Hicklin, an educator. And to navigate us through this evening's program, we have three co-chairs. We have Jackie Mackenzie, a solicitor in London, and Jackie is a true Grenadian Caribbean woman. She has been in the news recently, in fact, in November 2020, at a virtual Black Excellence Awards. She was presented with the Powerless 2021 Humanitarian Award for her work serving justice for those affected by the Windrush scandal in the UK. And she has received several awards otherwise. In 2020, she was also recognized as Campaigner of the Year from the European Diversity Group team, and she also received an award, from Legacy Award for an outstanding campaigner in human rights law. So Jackie is well known. She is an activist since her youth in Grenada from the Institute of Further Education. We have also Dr. Anne, Sister Val Cornwall, the co-chair for education. Jackie is the co-chair for health. Val Gordon Williams, she is well known. In fact, Val needs no introduction. She has been an activist since her days in Grenada. She's now based in Toronto, and she was one of the key campaigners in the CPE program, the Center for Popular Education, one of the national coordinators of that program. And Val has remained active throughout up to this very day. And of course, we have Dr. Paul Clement. Val would coordinate the education aspect of the program, and Dr. Paul Clement, who hails from Petit Martinique. So Petit Martinique is well represented in the house this evening. Dr. Clement is a professor of economics and chair of the Department of Social Sciences of the State University of New York. And in fact, he is doing his current research focusing on regional integration in the developing world, and that embraces the Caribbean, Latin America, and Africa. So these, and Paul is the co-chair for the economy aspect of the program. Now, what we will do is allow 15-minute presentations by each panelist, and we'll have ample opportunity to engage in interactive discussion that will be navigated by the three co-chairs. We'll have between 45 minutes and an hour for interactive discussion. So what you can do during the presentations, we can utilize the chat to raise your questions and comments that can be directed thereafter to the three panelists. So any questions and comments, you do so through the chat. Some ground rules. We appeal to everyone to ensure that your mics are muted when the presentations are being made. All mics should be muted, save and except the person who is presenting at that particular time. And as I said, your comments should be could be made in the chat group. So let us move on with the program. You'll hear much about what's coming up. We have some pre-recorded aspects and we have some live aspects. The aspects with the chair and the presenters, that will all be live. So let me now turn you over to our first co-chair, Jackie Mackenzie, to take you henceforth to the next aspect of the program. Jackie?
Thank you very much, Ruggles. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night, depending on where you are. Welcome. It's wonderful to have a global audience to celebrate the 42nd anniversary of the Grenada Revolution. As Ruggles said, I'm Jacqueline Mackenzie. I lived in Grenada for part of the revolution, and I'm now based in the UK. I have the pleasure of moderating the first of tonight's 3 sessions, which will focus on health. I'll also be introducing some of the cultural performances, reading some of the solidarity messages, and introducing the second moderator, whose focus will be on education. Before I introduce the first speaker, Dr. Sonia Nixon, who will deliver the session on health, you will see 2 short videos. The first is an extract of a speech by Maurice Bishop, given on the 13th of March, 1979. And the second is on the healthcare provisions and outcomes during the Grenada Revolution. Please enjoy the videos.
For work, for food, for decent housing, for health services, and for a bright future for our children and our great-grandchildren. Words of Maurice Bishop delivering his first speech to the people of Grenada on behalf of the revolution on March 13th, 1979. In the area of health, like in other areas, the revolution undertook radical transformative programs centered on mobilizing collective creativity of the people. Health service emphasis was on preventative medicine at the community level, a comprehensive public health education component. This people-centered approach to healthcare was manifested in the approach to the dengue fever crisis in 1980 and the immunization of agricultural workers against tetanus during the revolutionary period. A major problem the revolution inherited was the combined effect of scarcity of doctors and substandard level of healthcare facilities. From very early in the revolution, 12 specialist doctors, including 3 dentists, were brought in from Cuba. This greatly reduced the need for medical-related travel to other islands and improved the doctor-patient ratio. Dental clinics were set up in each of the 7 parishes. A new eye clinic and fully equipped maternity unit was established at the General Hospital. Greater use was made of nurse practitioners, and a 24-hour casualty service was established at the General Hospital with 2 doctors living on the premises. Medical provision was also extended to the islands of Carriacou and Petit Martinique, with 2 resident doctors and 1 dentist, and establishment of a new health clinic. Simultaneously, scores of young people were given scholarships to study medicine overseas, particularly in Cuba. Outside the provision of free healthcare at the community level, the maternity leave law was one of the more iconic achievements of the revolution. The passage of this law, spearheaded by the National Women's Organization, protected the livelihood and postnatal health for women. It guaranteed 3 months of maternity leave with full pay, together with the right of re-employment with the same employer. The peace of mind that resulted from the job security that this law provided cannot be underestimated from a mental health and general health standpoint.
I now have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Sonia Nixon. Is one of the first students to have qualified as a doctor in Cuba, thanks to the relationship between Cuba and the Grenada Revolution. Revolution. However, when she returned to Grenada in 1986, she was prevented from practicing medicine and so had to move to Jamaica, where she took a number of roles in public and private healthcare. Moving on from Jamaica, Dr. Nixon obtained a master's degrees in public health and social and behavior sciences from Boston University before moving to Bermuda to take on some medical roles. In 2016, she returned to Grenada, where she practiced as a senior medical officer with responsibility for chronic diseases at the Ministry of Health. She currently works as a family practitioner, is interim chairperson of the Grenada Cancer Society, serves as an executive member of the Grenada Diabetes Association, and is vice chairperson of the National Non-Communicable Chronic Disease Commission. After Dr. Nixon speaks, we'll go straight into two cultural performances in the form of drumming by Monty Drayton and a rendition by the Comanchero Steel Orchestra. If you have questions on the health topic or for Dr. Nixon, please put them into the chat. Thank you to Dr. Nixon.
Good evening, everyone, and happy March 13th. I'm trying to remember the morning after March 13th when I, as a young teacher at Boca Secondary School, learned where my partner, my daughter's father, had been for the last 3 months, 6 months, that I couldn't find him in the nights. It was welcoming for us as young Grenadians that it was going to be change. We had gotten into this state of inertia that nothing seemed to be happening. But I'm here to talk about health, and I want us to think that from March 13th, 1979, the People's Revolutionary Government demonstrated the priority status of health by the Prime Minister, Maurice Bishop himself, assuming responsibility for the health sector. So just let that sink in. The Prime Minister took on health. I think it reflects
Dr. Nixon, you've muted yourself somehow, or someone's muted you.
I think I've been muted. So I'm going to say on March 13th, the PRG demonstrated the priority status of health by Prime Minister Maurice Bishop himself, assuming the role of Minister of being in charge of that sector. It's important because generally the person who's Prime Minister tends to be in charge of finance and, the sexier areas. I think it reflects two things. One, how important it was to the PRG that health be up at the forefront, and also that the state in which the country found itself as for health was really in dire straits. But 1979 to 1983 may have been a fleeting historical moment for some people, but undoubtedly one of the most dynamic recorded and productive eras recorded in Grenada's history. However, when the People's Revolutionary Government assumed a leadership of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique, many of the issues that impacted access to and quality of healthcare for the people then, actually, they kind of still exist today, if we think about it. And that's unfortunate. The new movement with its novel political outlook in the 70s had long criticism among the many maladies that had been inflicted on our people in this tri-island state. The abysmal deficit, lent buoyancy to the party, rapidly propelling it into a position of acceptance and marked popularity among a people who had become disillusioned by the leadership of the GULP and the corrupt shenanigans of Eric Gary. The glorious scarlet billows of the so-called labor revolution of 1951 were long reduced to forgettable and unwelcome cinders, and it had been replaced by terror and by oppression to which the actions of the colonial masters simply paled. As hope of a future was replaced by darkness emerging from promises of brightness, And as action and progress morphed on uncontrollably into benefits that were simply reserved for a perverse and adoring and selected group of minions and thugs, the moods and aspirations of Grenadians dwindled into desperation. Once again, that militancy which a profound need and a sense of self-determination tends to evoke was repeated. You know, the right to health and education, equity and other social rights was slipping from everybody like the fine sand of Grenada's beach slipping through our fingers. So accepting the March 13th revolution was simple, simply because change was urgent. Within the health sector, conditions at a main multidisciplinary hospital were atrocious and simply unacceptable, marked by limited specialist services, dilapidated and under-equipped physical amenities, and lack of basic things like food for patients and drugs and sanitation. There was also a gross shortage of nurses, not unlike today. The core nurses, the core of our health system, not only were they underpaid and overworked, but they were forced to work in very compromising and professional and ethical situations. And this was seen as untenable. Enough that nurses and other healthcare workers of the St. George's Health Center in the early 70s had demonstrated against working conditions at the General Hospital and beyond, only to be overtly bullied by Gary's Mongoose gang, his brainless set of goons who aim to suppress the inalienable right of the nurses and the healthcare providers who chose to stay to manifest their acceptance of severely unfavorable working conditions. Grenada was therefore ripe for changes that the revolution had proposed. Better yet, as patriots, we were all prepared to put our shoulders to the wheel and propel our beloved homeland way out of this vast quagmire. So how does the World Health Organization look at health? What is this health thing? And I guess most of us know that definition, that the World Health Organization defines health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not only the absence of disease or infirmity. So even in a situation where you can provide medicines for high blood pressure, take care of people who have had amputation, and etc., there was also a need for people to be mentally and socially well. That didn't exist before the 70s. The very fact that you had to scramble to get whatever was there, or if you didn't have the money to access private care, created stress. That's mental illness. The very fact that if you weren't wealthy enough to, or let's say moneyed, you didn't have the funds, if you didn't have those funds to access care, that made you socially different. And that is unacceptable. So in order to guarantee optimal health, the optimal health of our people, we must collectively and conscientiously contemplate and apply certain factors without any compromise. First of all, we have to recognize that health is a fundamental right stated by the United Nations, and we know it is a fundamental right of every single citizen. We also have to understand that how each individual's social environment and circumstances may help to determine the standards of health that they enjoy. So those social determinants, how do they come into consideration? And it is the responsibility of countries' leaders, people who call themselves leaders, to ensure that the concomitant culmination of all the factors that contribute to the delivery of accessible and acceptable quality of care exists in the same place. By assuming power, however, the PRG immediately embarked on a mission to change the grossly unacceptable elements of the healthcare system, focusing on what was happening in those moments in 1979. What did the people deserve? How could this be remedied? What resources were required for change? And how and when the changes may be implemented? Remember, we heard and we all knew that there was no money. There was no money in the treasury. There was no money, okay? So how are we gonna do this? Notwithstanding, the PRG implemented that ground up from the grassroots that model of power and prepared what has become its unprecedented health policy by the end of its first year of governance. That model enabled the leadership to obtain clear understanding of the realities that existed in the communities at a grassroots level, while acquiring guidance for practical and sustainable strategic planning for problem solving and delivery of culturally acceptable, accessible, sustainable, community-based care service. The carefully crafted policy was developed by highly proficient professionals and who ensured that the real needs of the people were going to be met. Grenada had, however, subscribed to the Alma Ata Convention, which was signed in the Soviet Union in 1978. The design of this convention basically focuses on primary care, on primary health care, ensuring that services are delivered where people live, where they work, where they do everything, okay? It was based on case studies from countries like Cuba, who had an exemplary primary healthcare system, and the design of the Barefoot Doctors of China, where China took community people, trained them to do a lot of basic care, antenatal care, health education, all of those things that are sometimes forgotten because we think of the big things and we forget the simple things that influence the well-being of people in the community, and more so when it is delivered by people from within the community who understand especially the cultural needs of people and the behaviors. The objective of the Alma Ata was to deliver greater levels of healthcare to general populations with particular emphasis on primary care, taking into close consideration the social determinants like housing, water, sewage, etc. Was electricity? Did your children have access to school? How educated are parents? How educated are grandparents who take care of kids? What do they understand? How well do we communicate? How much we can access food? Do we have a garden? All of those things, all of those social determinants were taken into consideration. And it considered, the theme of this is 1978, the theme of the convention was Health for All by 2000. And a lot of us would have heard about it. The system proposed by the People's Revolutionary Government may in and of itself be considered reformatory because this had never happened before. Its principal objective was to provide health care to individuals and families at an affordable cost to the government. This policy explicitly stated that the government was assuming responsibility to ensure provision of quality primary care delivered, like I said, where people live, where they worked, and to encourage, therefore, their full participation in the services that were provided for them. Thus, the government will engage what we call the socio-ecological model. Starts with the individual, extends to their family, extends to their little community where they live, to the workplace, and to the broader community, okay? And considering at the same time, all levels of social and economic development that would occur in the communities. Because we think about health, but we also have to consider how are we going to develop other aspects of people's livelihoods. Healthcare cannot exist. Delivery of healthcare cannot exist in a vacuum. You cannot provide vaccines, yet children don't have water. You cannot provide antihypertensive medications or diabetes medications and people don't have where to exercise. You have to think about all the things that exist in a community that make them better. Jobs. Government can't provide everything, but it also has to empower people to understand their own participation, why it is important that they have the things that they have. The existing service centers in the communities, like the overburdened General Hospital, found themselves in varying states of infrastructural degradation, with an unfortunate paucity of professionals and support staff to offer care delivery. What else did the PRG inherit? Poor medical coverage, as told in our video, with a critical shortage of doctors and other trained personnel. We're not going to talk about specialists because that did not exist in communities. There was shortage of even the existing services that we said, okay, you can get your wound dressed, but there were no dressings. You can get your vaccines, but vaccines are short. We can do X, but we don't have gloves. We don't have syringes and needles today. So the absence of supplies and equipment abound. There was a low quality of primary health services when compared to what people could access in the public sector, but people probably didn't have money to access it. So it's not accessible if you can't afford it. All right. There was less preventive and more remedial services. So health education and primary prevention and even secondary prevention of diseases. And we see the extent to which chronic diseases are affecting us today. Right? That existed. Of course, the deficient environment health services marked by severe shortage of environment health officers and equipment required to do the task. And of course, of all the people who would support the system. There was also a plethora of untrained personnel causing frustration for the few trained staff. Imagine you walk in, you're the nurse, and they send somebody to work at the health center who train their nurse too because somebody tell them we're going as a nurse's aide. They have no training and they want to do what you do, and you've been to school for 3 years. Okay, I see it sometimes. On top of it, they did not offer the support that the system required because they were incapable of doing so. Their capacity was not on par with that which was needed to offer services to the community. Loyalty and allegiance superseded capacity and professionalism. And that led to challenges or came out of situations like situations of corruption and nepotism. Is it repeated today? I'm not going to answer that. The PRG was now compelled to initiate both short and long-term strategies to ameliorate the existing conditions. After all, the health of a people determines how productive and how wealthy the nation will become. And there was no doubt that Grenada's health system was in dire need of intensive care and attention. But we couldn't do that by ourselves, could we? We kind of didn't have any money. We didn't have any professional, we didn't have the capacitation within ourselves. So we kind of needed our partners. You know, in any crisis, one calls out for one's allies to support where legitimate and required resources, wherever these legitimate and required resources may be found. Cuba, who had become our friend, diplomatic relations were established in April 1979. It was in its 20th year of revolution and experienced a lot of what we were experiencing. By June 1979, deployed its first medical brigade, which joined some of our returning patriots to offer services to the Grenadian population. This Cuban team provided countrywide medical services for the first time in our history. You can go to a health center and there's somebody to take care of you. Specialty services, which are sorely lacking in internal medicine, endocrine surgery, orthopedics, pediatrics, ophthalmology, gynecology, and obstetrics. There was no regular prophylactic and curative dental care in health centers. It's mentioned that there were seven health centers in Grenada that now had dental services. And there was technological support to help us in planning and restructuring the entire healthcare delivery system. Since the establishment of that relationship, the people of Cuba have not ceased to support Grenada. 42 years of friendship, working along this path of development, especially towards ensuring that we have proficient delivery of healthcare. There has been an agreement of cooperation between great countries, and Grenada continues to benefit in many ways. Despite whatever government changes, ideology, political view, whatever it is, the Cubans have remained friends from the day when they started to help us with our challenges in 1979. And for 42 years, there have been other areas: oncology, pathology, intensive surgery, intensive case physicians. I'm sorry. Oh, somebody's mic is on. I'm sorry. Biomedical engineers, you name it. We've had nurses. Lots of nurses come in. When the pandemic struck and the government of Grenada asked for support last year, Cuba immediately sent us 5 nurses and 2 doctors who had been trained in that area and who have offered services. Luckily for us, our pandemic was not as bad as it could be. To ensure, however, a long-term solution to our healthcare deficiencies and ensure that there was ongoing capacitation of care provider, more than 350 students have graduated in various areas of health and medicine. In various areas. 60% of those graduates have graduated in health and medicine. I'm proud to be among the first group of Grenadians who went to Cuba on a need, on a deep sense of patriotism, jumped on a plane, went to Cuba on October 5th, because we know there was work to be done. There was
Dr. Nixon,
I'm not.
Dr. Nixon, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you've got 1 minute.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm gonna just make a couple of quick points. Apart from other partners like PAHO, the EU, SGU, which remains a partner today, not necessarily accepted in the beginning, right? Cuba was probably our most important. Grenada participates in all the programs of the UN, and in development, we have recently been discussing this strategic development goals, specifically goal number 3.8, which asks to ensure that healthy lives and promote well-being for all ages. 3.8 speaks specifically to something which we have to, which will become a point of discussion, I hope later, universal health care. This is what the PRG originally promoted. 42 years later, have we done so? We still have to consider how we're going to fund it. Normally, this comes from the government currently funds healthcare through taxation. Are we able to do so now that taxation in the inversion into the tax system has been so much stymied because of coronavirus? I'm sorry. The proposal of a national health insurance has been for discussion. Sadly, however, that discussion has not come from grassroots. It's come from the top and presented to the communities. Will it be viable? That will also become a point of discussion. Look, we're simply a small island nation of 110,000 people with a lot of challenges. We describe as middle and upper income by those who lend us money. And although the PRG was unable to deliver everything that we would have liked because of its short stay, I think it has given us a wonderful heritage, even if it wasn't called that, in universal health care. We all know that that is the way to go to ensure that care is available and affordable to all Grenadians. Until leaders understand the health sector and understand what their responsibilities are to open it to everyone, to lead, but to lead with leverage, understanding that situations will change, we are not going to be able to meet what we want to meet. We remain grateful, however, to all the opportunities that have been offered to us. We will continue to embrace whatever the ideas of the People's Democratic Revolution of Grenada lost or may have lost once the revolution ended, that we weren't able to operationalize our visions. Could we have been the healthiest nation in the Caribbean had we continued our revolution? Who knows? That's for discussion. We are also grateful, though, for all of those who have been our partners and who continue to do so. Long live the revolution in our hearts and our attitudes and our behavior and in our jobs, forward ever, with a deep sense of urgency. Thank you.
Wanted is bad, but the blood of tribulation. You have to bear, will make Superman want to despair. But the blood of the martyrs must not be shed in vain. Oh no, we must rise and shine again. But the blood of the martyrs must not be shed in vain. Oh no, we must rise and shine again.
I would like to thank Dr. Nixon for reminding us of the conditions and challenges which were met by the People's Revolutionary Government of Grenada and of some of the outcomes in healthcare that the revolution achieved. I'm also very grateful to her for her overview of the requirements and responsibilities of governments to deliver acceptable primary and secondary healthcare systems and what this means, something that Grenada remains a challenge to this day. I would also like to thank Monty Drayton for his soulful and poignant drumming, and the delectable, as always, and multi-award-winning Comancheros Steel Orchestra for their rendition. Thank you all. I am now going to read a few short solidarity messages from those that we've received. The first one is from Liberation, formerly the Movement for Colonial Freedom. They're a UK-based NGO with United Nations observer status, and they provide solidarity to various political and justice movements around the world, including with the peoples of the Polisario, the Palestinians and Kurdish regions, and in countries including Venezuela, Cuba, the Sudan, and India. It was one of the key organizations in the UK-based anti-apartheid campaign and has always been a great friend to Grenada. Their General Secretary, Maggie Bowden, says, Liberation sends their solidarity and greetings, celebrating the 42nd anniversary of the Grenada Revolution. The ideals that drove and underpinned the revolution were noble and have the goal of progressing the forward march of the Grenadian people and society. Liberation supports the continuing struggle of the people of Grenada for peace, progress, and justice. From Caribbean Labour Solidarity. Caribbean Labour Solidarity was formed in the 1970s by a number of trade unionists and political activists, including Richard Hart, who many of you will remember played a major role during the Grenada Revolution as its Attorney General. Today, the organization is an umbrella group of several progressive organizations and movements in the Caribbean. Their president, Luke Daniels, says, the Grenada Revolution 42 years ago was one of the most significant events of the 20th century for the English-speaking Caribbean. We at Caribbean Labour Solidarity feel honored and privileged to have played a small part in supporting the revolutionaries from the beginning of the revolution and throughout the years. We salute you on celebrating the achievements of the revolution, and we continue to stand in solidarity with the Grenadian people in the struggle for a just and peaceful society. Viva Grenada, viva socialism. Caribbean Labour Solidarity. And all the way from Australia, we have Susan Berkeley, who was a student of the revolution, and like myself, one of the inaugural students of the Revolution's Institute for Further Education. Suzanne says, I, Susan Berkeley, a child of the Grenada Revolution, extend happy anniversary greetings from Grenadians in Australia to all in Grenada and the diaspora. The revolution lives in our spirits. And from UK-based Grenada Forward Ever, set up to support progressive and community activities in Grenada in the spirit of the revolution. Their secretary, Jean Tate, says as follows, warmest solidarity greetings from Grenada Forward Ever UK. We continue to be inspired by the amazing progress made in all human fields during the Revo. Long live the spirit of the Grenadian people. And last but by no means least, our dear comrade from South Africa, from the African National Congress, and today, South Africa's ambassador to the Holy See, Comrade George Johannes, says, my dear comrades and friends, the unforgivable and illegal invasion of Grenada is an event which many of us in South Africa will never forget. The dramatic demise of the revolution is something we couldn't believe. We will continue to show our solidarity and support for the people of Grenada. And we hope that one day the truth will be revealed and the criminal act of Ronald Reagan's administration will be judged as an evil act of revenge for the solidarity between the people of Grenada and Cuba. Long live the international solidarity between the peoples of Grenada and the peoples of Azania. The struggle continues and victory is certain. Power to the people of Grenada. I now have the pleasure of handing over to the second session, which is going to be occasion. The moderator for that session is going to be Val Gordon-Williams. Val was the National Program Coordinator of the Center for Popular Education, the CPE, and an executive member of the National Women's Organization. Val is now based in Canada, where she works as the program director of Quebec's Board of Black Education. Over to you, Val, and thank you all very much.
Sorry, Val, you're muted. You're muted.
Thank you very much, Jackie. And a special and warm welcome to all of you who have been able to join us for this special celebration this evening. Welcome. Let me remind anyone with questions to add them to the chat so that we can have the panelists respond to those questions later on in the session. We now have the second segment of this panel discussion and celebration, and it is going to be on education. First, we have a video on education, which we hope will inspire you and help us all remember those days. Then we'll have our second panelist, Dr. Anne Hicklin, who lives in Australia, and we are especially happy to have her join us all the way from Australia. It's early morning there. Followed by a short art presentation put together by Martin Snowy Felix.
Education, education, this is the foundation. Our rising population needs sound education.
Education was key to delivering the bright new dawn for Grenada's children and great-grandchildren. With this in mind, the revolution embarked on some radical transformative programs. Prior to the revolution, only a small percentage of teachers had professional qualifications. The only teacher training school on the island ran a 2-year program with an annual intake of 40 teachers. The National In-Service Training Program, or NISTEP, was devised to train all 600 teachers in just under 2 years. Alongside NISTEP was the Community School Day Program, which involved members of the community manning schools while teachers were out training. Free secondary education was another important innovation of the revolution. This assisted working people who had difficulty finding the school fees to pay for their children's secondary education. Free secondary education was treated as part of the social wage. Supplementing free education were the free school books and uniform program and the National Transport Service, NTS, to get children to and from school in an inexpensive and timely manner. The PRG placed great emphasis on tertiary education, and by 1982, 300 Grenadian students were attending higher education institutions around the world on state scholarships, compared to only 3 in 1978. One of the signature programs in education was the Center for Popular Education, or CPE. With this program, in just 3 years, illiteracy was reduced from 20% to less than 3% of the population. The Worker Education Classes program was another innovation of the revolution. revolutionary cadres would enter the workplace periodically and explain the significance of political, social, and economic development affecting the country. This program, while described and dismissed as propaganda classes by detractors, served not only to educate ordinary workers about what was happening locally and globally, but it also gave them a perspective beyond their selfish, monetary needs, essential in building a new and just society.
First of all, I'd like to begin by giving a big shout out to Makila McKee, our youngest, most famous artist. She won, she became the first artist in around 16 Caribbean nations in the 8 to 11 year old category. This was announced a couple of weeks ago, but she, her artwork, like all of the other artwork, were on the theme of personal finance in the age of COVID. So she emerged #1 in the 8 to 11 year old category. So she is our youngest, most famous artist. But we cannot begin to talk about Grenadian art without beginning where it began, with the petroglyphs of the Amerindian era. I say Amerindian era because these artworks, according to archaeologists, predate the European contact of, in Grenada's case, 1650. So this work needs to be appreciated. These works need to be appreciated much, much more. They're over 109 or so scattered throughout Grenada, particularly in areas of Mount Rich and in areas of Victoria, St. Mark's. Grenada actually is the most petroglyph dense population in the Eastern Caribbean. I think only second to Guadeloupe.
Yes,
There
yes, that's okay. That's okay.
more petroglyphs per population.
I figured it.
And so we need to begin where it begins, and I don't think it's appreciated enough. But here we have some modern expressions using this inspiration of the petroglyphs. In this case, this is some Chantuel art that was part of an exhibition of Grenadian artists in Jamaica. I did not get the name of the artist, but this is one of many of these artworks that were featured. Advanced cultures, like many African cultures, fuse the old and the new. Japanese art, Chinese art as well. We tend not to do much of that because of the experience of colonialism. So there's a kind of discontinuity. So hopefully this will be the beginnings of such continuity. When we think of the revolution, oftentimes we talk about the gains of the revolution. Oftentimes art is not recognized. And this cannot be further from the reality. The revolution recognized art as central to its goals, not just in terms of art for art's sake, but also in terms of promoting the aims of the revolution, the goals of the revolution, and mobilizing the masses. So just wanted to reflect on that a bit. I was given the opportunity to present my art in this exhibition, but I just thought it was going to be unfair to the legacy of the revolution to just present myself. However, I'm hoping that more artists will contribute later on. This was a very late request, and we did not get many of the artists that were possible to be part of this. So I will just give a sense of what the legacy of the revolution created as far as art is concerned. Two main issues, two main points to make here. First is that the recognition of art as important was from the jump, right? So the revolution saw through the Ministry of Culture art as being central to its mission. So the Ministry of Culture set up a national handicraft institute under the leadership of Yvonne Palmer, and she was also director of Grenada, as you can see here. Let me just go back a little bit and say really quickly that one of the commonalities in the Amerindian experience and the Grenada Revolution experience is that during the Amerindian Amerindian art met a similar fate to the art of the Grenada Revolution. So when the Europeans, conquered and occupied Grenada, they destroyed much of this artwork that was shown, the petroglyphs that were shown earlier. They were blasted, quarries were made from the stones. They were just like thrown around. Much of it has been destroyed. Very similar to the Grenada Revolution. After the invasion, or during the invasion, the artwork, much of the work on billboards, Grenada was halted. As I said, much of the artwork was defaced and destroyed. A friend sent me a photo of one of my works that was at the National Transportation Service, and the Americans or whomever just like painted it over and just put a P in place of the N for National Transportation Service. And so anyway, that was just one example of what was done to many of the artwork. So Grenada ceased to exist, and a lot of the artwork were destroyed. So much of the work that I'm showing here from this period, from books and from old photos, much of it black and white, and so on and so forth. So that was Grenada, as was shown, and so this was created in 1981. And in addition to the Ministry of Culture appointing Yvonne Palmer's leadership, Jacob Ross was also appointed director of programs of cultural programs within the Ministry of Culture. So Jacob Ross, poet and writer, was one of the chief architects of cultural programs within the ministry. This is an example of some of the works that were created by Grenadian artists of the era. There's Betty Leduc, who did all these lovely burlap artwork that were at Grenada. And these were expressions heralding the goals of the revolution and the slogans of the revolution and so on, but just really beautiful. Sorry that it's rendered in black and white, but that's the best we can do for now. Hopefully we'll revisit those a little bit later to get some of the, I'm sure these exist in various places around the world, and we'll try to recover some of those, at least get better resolution. Here's an artist that was featured in Free West Indian from very early. That's another thing in terms of like the role of art during the revolution. The revolution saw art as important, so the organs of the revolution reflected the coverage of art. Like, for example, this is Freddie Alexander, covered within the Free West Indian as a young artist in the making, and Garvin Strode, who I'm sure is with us today, went to visit him while he was doing his work and captured this here. And so this is another example of the artwork that served as as signs for the revolution, the logos and billboards and so on. This is, in this case, Center for Popular Education. Billboards like these were all over the place. There were more billboards per capita than I think any of the other countries at the time. Really, I think we were the only ones really doing this kind of revolutionary work, but also just in terms of billboards per se. This is at a rally, artists were mobilized during such times, in this case, the African Liberation Day rally of 1981, but from the jump, from 1979 onwards, artists were involved in revolutionary activities, and many of us were worker artists. So, for example, I was taken away from my job and paid, continued to be paid my salary while doing the artwork for the revolution. So here we are, some more of these billboards, and to the extent that art is also, photography is also art, these are some examples of some of the iconic art portraits as well, iconic photos of the revolutionary era. So you see the billboards with the photography here. Some more. And so this is a publication. So again, the digital arts, or the beginnings of those, in this book with Chris Searles, one of the Grenadian artists, designed this, but also this was a general CPE, iconic logotype. Again, photography during the revolutionary period. Angela Davis in St. George's. Another very iconic photo is this poet, I think it was Garvin, maybe not, but just a poet. And poetry played a very, very important role during the revolution as well. So this poet doing his thing amongst the youth, young poet as well. And this is one of perhaps the most iconic of the photos of the revolutionary period. Another one of those. And this young man is, I think his name was Lyndon Adams of Listia Carriacou. He was the youngest CPE teacher, 12 years old. And this was a very famous photo and also very significant. I think he was teaching someone who was in their 80s, right? 12-year-old CPE volunteer. And another iconic photo of Michael Manley in Grenada. This must have been a St. George's Declaration. Again, very famous photo. And today we have a few, very many artists in Grenada that are in the diaspora doing their works. Denzel Forrester is one of those famous ones. And here he is doing one of his abstract pieces. This is another very famous painting of his. He captures a lot of the pop culture in the UK, particularly reggae and dub culture. And he's very famous for that. Professor Oliver Benoit, a very prominent contemporary Grenadian artist. Here is one of his works. He's a professor, and he does a lot of studies on Grenadian nationalism. And I think he's part of a project to redesign the monument for the Grenada martyrs, the defenders of the country, against the U.S. invaders. But he, I think, is part of that project to redesign that monument. And very significant, very important. And this is one of his works, another of his abstract works. Sorry for the rendition here. And this is some of the things that I do. And Kalanji Brathwaite is a Barbadian artist who see here, he captures Maurice Bishop as part of the Last Supper. And Maurice Bishop is central here, very important. He was inspired by the Grenada Revolution. And he won an art exhibition in Barbados, and now he's pretty famous here in New York City. Gordon Hamilton is another important Grenadian artist that continues to inspire. Claire Carew is a friend of mine who lives in the UK. She is the niece of Yan Carew. She is seen here doing her artwork, but she visited Grenada during the Revolution, and she was inspired to make this contribution. The Grenada Art Council continues to do its thing, and in 2011, they had this exhibition, the Grenada Revolution, an artist's perspective. I just thought I'd just share some of this with you.
But we must always be on the side of the truth. But we must always be on the side of the truth.
About what is really happening in free revolutionary Grenada.
The Grenada Art Council was founded in 1964, so it predates the revolution.
So thank you, Snowy, for the art presentation. I am unsure if it's finished, but it seems so. I'd like to now introduce Dr. Anne Hickling. Anne Hickling, Professor Anne Hickling Hudson has had a lifetime career of over 40 years as an educator. Born and raised in Jamaica, she has taught and trained teachers at schools, colleges, and universities in Jamaica, Grenada, the UK, and Australia, where she is now a retired adjunct professor of education at the Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane. Besides teaching, Anne has also been an educational planner and curriculum developer, and is currently the co-editor of a post-colonial education journal and book series. She has been president of 3 professional educational associations, including the World Council of Comparative Education Societies. She's a founder and member of the past president and current newsletter editor of the Australian Association for Caribbean Studies, a group of Caribbeanists which has been flourishing in Australia since 1998, and has won several competitive research awards, including a Rockefeller Fellowship, a postdoctoral fellowship, and 3 large Australian National Research Awards. She's widely published with research and on education policies and practices for decolonization and development, and has spent 2 landmark years of her life working as an educator in the Grenada Revolution, living there with her family in 1981, 82, and 83. She left the Caribbean with her family in 1985 to live and work in Australia, and from there developed her research studying 2 important innovations of the Grenada Revolution. For her MA in Education, awarded in 1988 by the University of the West Indies, she studied Grenada's NISTEP, the National In-Service Teacher Education Program, in which she had taught for 2 years as a senior lecturer in the team of educators. I have the honor and privilege and absolute pleasure of introducing you to Dr. Anne Hickling.
If she can unmute. Professor Hickling, you're muted.
Right.
Good morning, everyone. It's Sunday morning for us in Australia. And so I had my March 13th was yesterday. We are 15 hours ahead of the Caribbean. It's a real pleasure for me to be participate in this forum that celebrates the achievements of the Grenada Revolution. As Val was saying, I spent 2 landmark years of my life in Grenada during the revolution, working there with my family. Our 2 boys went to GBSS. They started secondary school in Grenada and they still have friends from GBSS. So really, when I reflect on the achievements of the Grenada Revolution, they're really very significant for the Caribbean, because like all of our countries, and you know, my country is Jamaica, but all of our Caribbean countries suffer from the dysfunctional education system left by the British. And Grenada suffered just as much, with a huge proportion of the population undereducated, or sometimes not even having had the chance to go to school. And I witnessed and was a part of the teams of the Grenadian people who started to tackle those problems in an extremely innovative and significant way. So today I want to just remember some stories about the various education projects in Grenada that made them so significant for the whole region and the whole post-colonial world, actually. The first time that I was involved in Grenadian education was being a facilitator in the workshop run by the famous educator Paulo Freire from Brazil. In that workshop in 1980, 50 Grenadian teachers were participating, and we spent 2 weeks with Paulo Freire discussing the problems of education and society in Grenada. This was a watershed moment for us as educators, because Freire ran the workshop in a very different way. He uses dialogic education so that, you know, small groups of learners have conversations about their understanding of problematic themes. And at the end of those small group discussions, we all came together in a larger group and put our ideas together. And we learned over those 2 weeks what a powerful method of education that was. At the end of it, the 50 teachers from Grenada put their ideas together in a book. I hope someone still has that booklet that, that was produced by the teachers of Grenada at that workshop. I've written up the process in various journal articles, but we need to do more on that because it's a legacy, not only for the region, but for the world. All right, so that was my introduction to the revolutionary potential of education in change in Grenada. I was involved in the National Teacher Education Program in Grenada as a senior lecturer in the NISTEP program for 2 years. And that was also a very educative experience for me. First of all, it showed how a massive problem could be tackled by a country that has very small resources. We devised an in-service training program. And remember, 67% of Grenada's teachers had been left totally unqualified. No training at all as to how to teach. And this is what NISTEP tackled. So we took in 300 teachers into that program. And it's a small country, so 300 is a huge number to educate. And we worked out along the way a professional program to develop them as teachers. We worked together with the University of the West Indies to develop accreditation, and we designed different kinds of interventions for them so that they had a professional curriculum. They taught in the classrooms, supervised by teachers who were already qualified. And then on each Friday when they came into the college, we had the community school day program when parents would come into the school and help the children with creative arts and all sorts of creative activities while their teachers were studying. So in many ways, NISTEP was a very innovative solution, a model for developing countries as to how you can tackle a huge problem of unqualified teachers. And hundreds of teachers went through that program. We had planned to do the same for secondary teachers because at the secondary school level, 70% of the teachers were unqualified. And so, you know, had the revolution not collapsed, we would have gone on to train that 70% of secondary school teachers that needed training. Okay, so that the other big problem-solving program that I really learned from during the Grenadian Revolution was the adult education program. As you heard, Valerie, who introduced me, was the director of the Center for Popular Education, which coordinated the various aspects of the adult education program. And it was a very complex program. 4,000 adults enrolled in that program. Well, 1,300 completed it after a year or two. They became literate. They had the basics of literacy and started the equivalent of primary education, but designed for adults. So that was another way in which Grenada was a model for the world as to how you can tackle a problem of non-literacy that, you know, was a large problem for the population. I want to say one more thing about the adult education program. It was really, it was very different from other adult education programs that I had encountered in Jamaica and other countries because of the high level of challenging ideas that was brought about through the literacy program. I have, I just want to read a little part of one of the textbooks from the adult education program that were teaching adults to read and to study. Okay, so this book one of the literacy program quoted this passage from a Haitian novelist, a novelist called Jacques Roumain from Haiti. And this was the extract. We're this country and it wouldn't be a thing without us, nothing at all. Who does the planting? Who does the watering? Who does the harvesting? Coffee, cotton, rice, sugarcane, cacao, corn, bananas, vegetables, and all the fruits. Who's going to grow them if we don't? Yet with all of that, we're poor, that's true. We're out of luck, that's true. We're miserable, that's true. But do you know why, brother? Because of our ignorance. We don't know yet what a force we are. What a force, all the peasants, all the Negroes of plain and hill, all united. Someday when we get wise to that, we'll rise up from one end of the country to the other. Then we'll call a General Assembly of the Masters of the Dew, a great big maroon of farmers, and we'll clear out poverty and a new life. That was the kind of material that these adults studied. It was not the kind of patronizing material that you see in other adult education programs where you get adults who are catching up on their education. It was challenging ideas for people to talk about them. Another thing that came out of my experience of working in NISTEP was the involvement in weekly meetings of work study. Now, when I first was told about this work study idea, I thought that the academic staff would get together and discuss, you know, the development of the revolution and what needed to happen and how things were being planned and so on. But in fact, what happened was that the entire staff of NISTEP got together. Academics, administrators, cleaning staff, the gardeners, everybody met in the same room. Now, I have grown up in Jamaica and been teaching and lecturing in colleges for a long time, and I had never encountered anything like that. So that was really illuminating to me to see how you can bring everybody working in an institution together to discuss the development of the country and the programs of development. So that's just another little story of, you know, how I learned a lot from being an educator in the Grenada Revolution. It was a glimpse of real equality, not just equality in rhetoric. Okay, another glimpse of mobilization was how communities can come together to help the revolution, because there were these structures that were set up by the revolutionary government, the parish councils, the zonal councils meeting at a small, local level and discussing the problems of their particular community and how they were going to be solved. All this came together in the People's Budget, which was an initiative of the Ministry of Finance. So instead of just the economists discussing the budget and handing it down to the people, which is the common practice all over the Caribbean and the world, this budget was designed from the bottom up through a series of meetings on the ground, through the zonal councils, through the parish councils. Political leaders would come to discuss with the people the problems of the society and how they could be tackled and what finances should be allocated to them. At the end of that, there was a huge general meeting in the hall. Where's that hall, Valerie? The hall was
GBSS, maybe?
Yeah, it was near Grenada.
The dome.
The dome.
Yeah,
the dome.
the dome. We all
The
met in the
dome.
dome
Yeah.
and had, days of meeting the whole country. People who were involved in the local councils met to discuss the budget. And when the budget came out, you saw reflected the ideas of the people in that budget. This is a revolutionary model. And so I really think that's one of the legacies of the revolution, an educative legacy that the world should recognize and learn from. The other institution that I was involved in that I learned a lot from was the National Women's Movement, the National Women's Organization, NWO, which was run by some brilliant Grenadian women, a group of excellent women under the leadership of my old school friend, Phyllis Cord, who sadly died last year. Phyllis and her Grenadian colleagues really, it was a revolutionary model, that way of organizing the women of the country. I had been used to, in Jamaica, political partisanship. So if you were a member of that party, you had that movement of women, or this party had another movement. But in the National Women's Organization in Grenada, we constantly exhorted all women to join it, whatever their political beliefs were. So it was a unified movement of women deciding what women needed and what children needed to advance. So you had, infant feeding and early childhood education and assistance with books and uniform and school feeding programs and all the problems that affect families. It was really an inspiration for me because we would meet a group of women, Phyllis and her Grenadian colleagues and myself. Women multitask. We get the breakfast, we send the children to school, we supervise the homework, we, have dinner, organize dinner. And then after that, we go out into the highways and byways through the National Women's Organization and meet with rural women and women who had invited us to their communities. Late at night, that's after a full work day, we would go out into the communities at night, meet with women who came from impoverished circumstances. Sometimes there wasn't even electric light, there was those oil lanterns that lit up the hall or the house. And we would talk with the community of women about their situation and what they needed to move forward. So it was always from the ground up. another example through the women's movement as to how political learning took place during the revolution. This other thing about community development, I was simply amazed when through the women's organization and the zonal councils, we were called upon to help with road building. So if you had a dirt path in your community that needed to become a road, the government was willing to, they have professional road builders that you would lay the tarmac and so on. But you need to have a foundation for that. So the people in the community would actually get together and help to lay the gravel for the new road, so that, you know, the government workers could come in and put the tarmac on top of that. And so we'd get together and we'd bring lemonade and sandwiches and food to help us with that very difficult task of putting gravel on the road. So at every level, there was community involvement and the joy of being able to build your community was something that we all learned from in the Grenada Revolution. Then there was the involvement with Cuban educators, because maybe not many people know that the Ministry of Education under Jackie Kreft had been designing a program of improving particularly maths and science, which are very weak all over the Caribbean. And the Cubans excel at it. UNESCO has done a study which showed that their school students excel in the entire Latin American region. They are way beyond any other country. So we wanted to know what is their secret of teaching effective maths and science. And of course, the Cubans sent a team of maths and science educators to help Grenadian teachers improve the curriculum and the pedagogy of maths and science teachers. Well, unfortunately, the revolution collapsed before that could, make much progress. But the idea is there. What do we need to do to improve that very weak flaw that we have in our regional education system? Really bad maths results, really poor science results. A country cannot move forward without better maths and science teaching. And that was one of the ideas that the Grenada Revolution put forward. And then, of course, there were the scholarships that Cuba offered to the Grenadian young people to study at the universities in Cuba. I think in the 4 years of the revolution, up to 300 scholarships were given by Cuba. It was unprecedented in Grenada for a small country to have 300 university and college scholarships is a significant leap forward. It's the foundation for a leap forward. And I understand that Dr. Sonia Nixon was one of those young people who went to study medicine in Cuba. Quite a lot went from Jamaica as well, but because we're a much bigger country, it was a smaller proportion than what went from Grenada. So that was something that I learned by being involved in education in the Grenada Revolution, was how you can transform education into a revolutionary process by looking at the Cuban system. Because some of us in the Ministry of Education would go to Cuba to help organize the scholarships and the Cuban teachers who came over and so on. And so I had a look for the first time at a system that was utterly different from the British model, that we have inherited in the Caribbean. Something important to learn from that. And
I think we have about 3 or so minutes left.
Okay.
Sorry that I have to insist.
Last thing I
only
want to
because,
say,
yes,
that
only
last
because we have
point-
another speaker. But thanks,
right.
thanks. Go ahead, please.
Just one last point that I want to make that maybe not a lot of people know was that the Ministry of Education was involved in serious forward planning, how to develop the education system. And Minister Jackie Kreft asked 3 of us to take charge of that research planning model. So for years, for nearly the 2 years that I was there, we worked on an education sector survey. And in fact, I have that in this book here. And I really hope they all haven't been burnt, but at least I have this copy. And it's a look at the entire education system of Grenada, all the problems of it, all the figures, and what we wanted to do to develop the education system. So, you know, those were enormous learning points that changed my career and outlook, and very significantly by having been involved as an educator in Grenada from 1981 to 1983. So I congratulate my Grenadian comrades and friends and colleagues for the huge achievements that they made in education in all sorts of ways in Grenada. Still a model for the region and a model for developed countries that are developing and trying to get out of the yoke of colonialism that has been left to them in the world. Okay.
Thank you very much, Anne. Thank you, thank you, thank you for a very warm, personal, inspiring, and brilliant reflection on how education was addressed by the revolution and the legacy of that that's yet to be fully documented and appreciated as well as utilized. So I promise you that in the interactive section, and I invite others who are present to ask questions so that you would get a further opportunity to expand on maybe a couple of the things that you were not able to expand to at this time, only because we need to get to the other speakers. But we were really thrilled to have had you participate, especially coming from all the way in Australia. Thank you, Anne. We do appreciate it. I think now we are going to, we've had the art presentation. So let me welcome and introduce Dr. Paul Clement for the 3rd segment of the panel discussion. Thanks again, Anne.
Thank you very much, Val. Thank you, Dr. Nixon, Dr. Hickory Hudson, for your insightful presentations on health and education. I want to thank each and every one of you today for taking the time to come to this event. As you can see, the history, our history is so crucial in understanding how we move forward. In this segment, we'll look at 2 short videos, one on the economy, and the other one would be on an extract from Wizard's IMF. And then I will introduce Dr. Brian Francis, who will speak on the economy. Thank you.
All your third world countries really feeling this squeeze. Only empty treasuries and bankrupt economies. You can't balance your budget, you riddled with foreign debt. But I don't mind any load I give to you. Once you keep in line and do as I say. nationalize. Just be prepared to privatize. If you really want my money, devalue the currency. Like Grenada government, institute retrenchment. To your Christ for museum death, because I am the IMF. Look what I do Guyana and also Jamaica. Now I have you Trinidad, I've already hit you hard. You had so much oil money, now you're running to me. But I don't mind any load I give to you. Once you keep in line and do as I say to do. Anything I tell you obey, like you cut public workers pay. If you really want my money.
Like in other areas, in the area of the economy, the revolution also undertook several radical transformative programs and initiatives. The PRG pursued a mixed economy comprising a state sector, a private sector, and a cooperative sector. Here again, the emphasis was on mobilizing the collective creativity of the people. Pursuit of this strategy of mixed economy and people's mobilization saw unemployment being reduced from 49% in 1979 to 14% in 1983, and sustained and increased growth in the economy of 2.1% in 1980, 3% in 1981, and 5.5% in 1982. In keeping with this economic strategy, the PRG established 44 state enterprises operating within the 4 pillars of the economy: agriculture and fisheries, tourism, manufacturing, and financial services. Some of the state enterprises included Agricultural State Farms, Agro Industries, Grenada Bank of Commerce, or GDC, the National Commercial Bank, or the NCB, the Marketing and National Importing Board, MNIB, Gravel and Concrete, and the National Insurance Scheme, the NIS. But the number one economic achievement, the number one state enterprise of the revolution, was and is the international airport. Every post-invasion government and the people of Grenada have benefited immensely from this major economic achievement. A remarkable innovation of the revolution was the institution of the people's participation of the preparation in the annual budget and plan. A provisional budget and plan document was prepared by the Minister of Finance. This document was distributed en masse across the country for debate at village, parish, and zonal council meetings, where suggestions or proposals were made for inclusion or deletion in the final budget and plan document. Once this process was completed, delegates from the parish and zonal councils and mass organizations was sent to the National Conference on the Economy, where the final document was presented, debated, and approved.
Dr. Brian Francis is a Grenadian who holds a PhD in economics from the University of Florida with specialization in international trade and economic development. He has an MSc in development finance from the University of London and a BSc in economics with first-class honors from the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus, Barbados. Dr. Francis is a former Director General in the Ministry of Finance in Grenada. He provided technical leadership in the government's budget and fiscal policies, debt management, financial planning, and trade policy. He was an economic advisor to the government of Grenada. Dr. Francis was also the Director of Economic Affairs and Regional Integration at the OECS Commission in St. Lucia. He was also the Senior Research Officer in the Ministry of Tourism in Barbados, an economist at the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, and as a senior lecturer in the Department of Economics at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus for over a decade. He has done consultancies with several regional and international organizations, as well as governments. As an academic, Dr. Francis has published on trade and economic growth in the Caribbean, and written dozens of scholarly papers in various regional and global journals in international business, international finance, and international trade. Dr. Francis has served on boards of various local, regional, and international organizations, including the Barbados Fair Trading Commission, the Grenada Development Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. Dr. Francis is currently the Chief Executive Officer of the Barbados Agricultural Development and Marketing Corporation. Based on his qualifications, as you can see, we can go on till midnight. So I'll stop here and I'll introduce to you Dr. Brian Francis.
Okay, thank you very much, moderator, and good evening to everyone. So first of all, we have to start at the screen, the sharing of the screen. Who is handling that?
Okay, Brian, you can, John, can you make Brian a co-host so he can share the screen, please? Try it now, Brian.
Okay, just give me a second.
Oh, you could do it now.
You can share the screen now?
John, can
you yes.
Brian a co-host so he can share the screen, please?
Okay, so is everyone's seeing it?
Yes, it's showing up now, Brian.
Okay.
The first page.
Right. Okay, great. Right, so this evening I would address this presentation by looking at 5 different things. The macroeconomic environment, what I call measuring diversification, economic paradigms, economics of the PRG, words of caution, and the next revolution. So,
Tabina, Tab, hand boot up. You do.
Yeah, it goes for acne.
Yeah,
sorry, can Mr. Jackson just put on his mute, please?
Put on your mic.
David Jackson, can you mute your mic, please?
Okay, are we ready to resume?
David Jackson, okay.
All right. No, this evening, right? I want to take you through this. I want to take you through this presentation with surgical precision. And the reason for that is because when you look at what has happened to the Grenadian economy in the post-COVID, in the period of COVID, it looks almost similar to what the revolution would have inherited back in 1979. So that being the case, it's time to reason, therefore, that if the revolution was able to take us out of the nightmare that it inherited in 1979, and we know what it has done to do so, then faced now with a similar situation, we therefore should be able to draw lessons from what happened in the revolution to help us emerge out of the current crisis. So that is why I therefore decided to approach the presentation in the way in which I am approaching it. What's happening here? My screen is stuck. My screen is stuck, it isn't moving. Okay, it's moving now. Yes. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about briefly is the macroeconomic environment that exists at the moment. And the objective then, at the end of the day, is to look at how do we configure the Grenadian economy, having had the experiences that we have had in relation to COVID. And if we are going to talk about configuring the economy, then there are two things we really need. One, some questions, and secondly, some data. So the first question I will pose is, how has Grenada's macroeconomic environment been affected by COVID-19? And to do that, we could just look quickly at some numbers. Now, what you have in the first screen is the real GDP growth rates, right, for Grenada, 2018 to 2022. What is interesting is, if you look at the third column, projection for 2020-21, you see a number in the bottom there, minus 12.2%. That is what the Ministry of Finance is projecting to be the growth rate, to have been the growth rate in 2020. Now, what's interesting is that my good friend, Dr. Patrick Antoine, he did some in-depth analysis on the growth rate in Grenada. And his analysis was based on data from March 2020. And what his analysis would have shown is that Grenada's economy would have contracted by about 20% in 2020. But some activities that took place over the Christmas period would have negated some of that, and therefore the economy in a sense would have contracted by about 16% in 2020. So the Ministry of Finance is telling us about 12.2%. Dr. Antoine's estimate is telling us about 16%. And usually these things happen because you are making projections, and a projection by definition will be wrong. So the important thing is not the number at the moment, but the fact that the economy clearly would have taken a huge beating as a result of COVID. And if we look at this second set of information, it just shows you how Grenada fared relative to CARICOM and the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. You can see no real difference. So the effects that we are seeing in Grenada are no different from what we are seeing in other CARICOM and ECCU member countries. Again, if you compare the GDP growth rate for Grenada with the ECCU average, again, you can see there not much difference when you look at those two lines. So everybody in a sense is being affected in almost, you look at visitor arrivals, and as you can see, all the numbers are negative. So you look at that third column, percentage change, 2020 over 2019, everything there is negative. So all of our source markets have been down. And that is a logical conclusion because we know that the borders have been closed. And when the borders are not closed, you have protocols to follow, etc., etc. So the numbers falling significantly, again, no real surprise there. If you look at the fiscal situation, even more alarming, because when you look at the variance between what was budgeted for 2020 and what the actual outcome was, it's a huge mess. Everything is down except transfers and non-tax revenue, right? So everything is done. All governments, major sources of revenue down, expenditure down, capital, current, everything is down. So, how do we emerge out of this? Well, one way to think of that is to look at what has been happening in the economy over a significantly large period of time. So to get a feel for that, what we will do is to look at what we call some diversification indexes. Try to measure the extent of diversification that will have taken place in the economy over a period of time. And in economics, we like to use the term robustness. And all robustness means is that we are not going to focus on one index, we are going to focus on at least two. In that way, you can compare one with the other, right? So we are going to calculate two indexes here. One we call the Hushman-Huffindal index, which, as you see, a very straightforward formula. You have some shares and you square them and you add them up. And the other one is an entropy index, where you take the shares, you multiply it by the natural log of the inverse of the shares. Again, you add them up across the sectors and you get a number. So what that would do, if we take what I have here, I put them in blocks so you wouldn't see all the numbers. So we start from 1977 and we go right up to 2020, right? So you have all on your left, all the sectors. On the left, we have all the sectors in the economy, and on the right, we have the contribution to economic activity, right? And as I say, those numbers go from 1977 to 2020. Right, so that's take us up to 2020. So I skipped some of them in the interest of time. Now, all we do, therefore, is take all of these numbers and we convert them into an index for each year, right? So we end up here with the Huffindal index, HH1, and the entropy index. So we take all the data on the performance of the different sectors and we convert them into those indexes. So we have two indexes. As you can see, the numbers run again from 1977 right up to 2022. Right? 2021 and 22 are basically projections. So we didn't include all the numbers here just to make sure that the table is nice and manageable. Well, as you say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So we take those numbers for the two indexes and we plot them. So that is what. So that is what the Hushman-Huffindal index looks like, right? So as you can see, between 1977 and 2020, that index is on a downward trajectory. And if we look at the other one, the entropy index, between 1977 and 2022, the entropy index is on an upward trajectory. So therefore, both indexes are telling us that over the last 46 years, Grenada's economy has indeed experienced some diversification. The question is, does that pass the smell test? Well, let's see. Look at what we have here. So what I have done, I have taken all the numbers for each year from 1977 right up to 2022, and I have done sorting of the numbers to determine which were the top sectors in the economy from 1977 right up to 2022, right? So we're going to go through them by groups and block of years as opposed to each individual year. So look at 1977. The top sector in the economy in 1977 was real estate, renting, and business activities. Second was agriculture. Third was wholesale and retail trade. Fourth, transport, storage, and communications. 5, construction. That's 1977. If you move to 1980, the third group, the picture is virtually the same. So those same 5 sectors dominating economic activity in Grenada. Let's skip forward a bit. If we go down to the last column, the last table, 2000. In 2000, the top sector in the economy was transport, storage, and communications, followed by real estate, renting, and business activities. And then coming in at number 5 is education. Let's fast forward a bit again to 2015. Top in the list in 2015, education, followed by transport, storage, and communications. And agriculture is now back at number 5. And then if you go forward to 2020, education is the top sector in Grenada. Real estate, renting, and business activities, number 2, construction, number 3. And if you project into the future, education, as you see, is supposed to continue to dominate in both 2021 and 2022. So, well, you didn't see all the numbers. In the interest of time, I couldn't show you all the numbers, but there are some interesting points that we can note from those numbers. The first point is that since 1977, Grenada's economy has been dominated by real estate, renting, and business activities. And I'm sure that might be a surprise to some of you. Agriculture, that was huge back in the 1970s, right up to the early 1990s, vanished in importance. So right now, agriculture in Grenada is really a statistic. Agriculture flourished, that's important, during the time of the revolution. This is even more critical. By 1995, agriculture was gone and tourism entered the top 5 for the first time. And I ask the question, do you remember what happened in 1995?
Dr. Francis, you're muted. I think you accidentally muted yourself. Dr. Francis? Yeah.
Dr. Francis, can you unmute yourself? Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So did you hear what I said in on the main points?
We heard the first 2 main points. The 2 points you made at first.
Okay, so the third one says agriculture flourished during the time of the revolution. The fourth point, by 1995, agriculture was gone and tourism entered the top 5 for the first time. I just asked the question, do you remember what happened in 1995? And the answer is that the NMP was elected to office. And so it's interesting that from the time the NMP entered office, agriculture has been on a downward trajectory. So much so that it no longer enters the top 5 in terms of significant sectors in the economy. By 2010, education took over. And as I said, by 2015, agriculture was gone, never to return. Now, those are significant. Why are they significant? They are significant because in the time of COVID, if it's one sector in an economy that should be kicking with gas, it should be agriculture in the time of COVID. If only we can do what the revolution has said, eat what you grow and grow what you eat, because food security is critical. So agriculture supposed to be a main player in a post-COVID environment. The question is, do we have the appetite to make agriculture an important sector, the important sector that it's supposed to be? I keep getting stuck here. Okay, so let's go back to the revolution period, 79 to 83. Again, I have the 2 indexes there from 79 to 83 for Grenada. And then we will plot them. The Huffindale index, you can see the huge decline in the Huffington Index. And if you look at the entropy index, again, you can see the steep rise in that index. So what that is telling you, both indexes are telling us that during the period of the revolution, we had a significant amount of diversification taking place in the economy. That is important. So, economic paradigms and the economics of the PRG. Now, I can't begin to talk here about the economics of the PRG because if I do, we're going to spend the rest of the day and the rest of the year, right? So what I'm going to do is to look at it in a generic sense. And I have here some economic paradigm, and you will see later why I have done this, right? So if you go way back to the time of Adam Smith, we started with the invisible hand. And from then forward, we have had a number of different economic paradigms that people have tried, either in whole or in part, to apply to solving economic problems facing their countries, right? The one in the bottom of this screen, the takeoff by Rostow, that's a very interesting paradigm because what that paradigm tells us is that countries go through stages of development, stages in the growth process. So you start from subsistence agriculture and you move right up to tourism and mass consumption. Why is that important? That is important because in Rostow's conceptualization of growth and development, what he's telling us is that a country that focuses on agriculture is economically backward. And a country that is dominated by tourism, services, mass consumption is a modern economy. Well, look at the irony. In comes COVID. And what has COVID done? Destroy tourism. What has it done? Make agriculture the important sector that it is supposed to be. So how come in 2020 can we argue that if you are focused on agriculture, you are backward, and if you are focused on tourism, you are modern state of the art? That argument might have held back in the 50s, but that argument cannot be held today. But we're not here to talk about Rostow. I'm just showing you different paradigms. Next one at the top, Marxism. Another interesting concept within the context of the revolution. What a lot of people don't know is that while the politics of the revolution was Marxist-Leninist, there is no doubt whatsoever that the economics of the revolution was capitalist. And that might sound like a contradiction, but it is not. So the economics that was practiced during the revolution wasn't Marxist-Leninist economics. In fact, as far as I know, the revolution rejected central planning, right? So the market mechanism that we talk a lot about today, that is what was practiced heavily during the days of the revolution. And what was that influenced by? That was influenced by what we have in the bottom there, the basic needs paradigm. Rather interesting. So what's the basic needs paradigm? The basic needs paradigm basically looks at structural change and diversification within the economy, right? And it talks about the need for economic growth. Small countries cannot progress, cannot solve unemployment, cannot manage inflation, cannot do anything if we don't have economic growth. But it also stresses the importance of government, particularly in relation to improving efficiencies and eradicating inequalities and solving the economy. And that paradigm, interestingly, emerged during the late 1980s. So as you can see here, all of the people who were the proponents of that paradigm. And the ILO, the International Labour Organization, and the World Bank, they were two of the main proponents of that paradigm. And the revolution in the first 3 years of its growth and development basically followed to a T the basic needs approach to economic development. And it worked extremely well. Well, if you're going to follow that approach to economic development, it means that certain things must be done. And therefore,
Dr. Francis, you have 3 more minutes.
3 more minutes?
Yes.
But I'm only getting warm up. Okay, let me fast forward then. So these are some of the top areas of economic activity that the revolution focused on, right? So we can replicate some of those today. Now, all right, since you give me 3 minutes, I'll skip stuff. I wanted to emphasize some words of caution, right, in terms of what we do by way of lessons from the revolution. And I have done so by simply picking some lyrics from some calypsos, right? And one of the most telling is a calypso by our own flying turkey called Grenada Belongs to We. And some of the things he says in that calypso: governments stop exposing talent to foreign nations. Make us feel that we can return home to give a hand. For the task of responding to our nation's call is not only on one, but it depends on all. He makes a point which is consistent with what has happened to us with COVID. Bigger nations sneeze and we catch the flu. He also makes the point, political parties, stop condemning your predecessors. So all of those who like to condemn the revolution made this mistake, but the revolution did a lot of good. Let us look at the good that they have done, and let us extrapolate from those, right? And he also made the point that no superpower, no America can solve our problems. In the end, when they are wrong, we'll be faced with them. Then to my good friend scholar, 2 brilliant songs, Flying Without Wings and Dancing Without Feet. And essentially, all I'm going to say to Grenadians is that we have the ability to make our economy dance without, fly without wings. We have that ability. It depends on what we do to make it happen. In that song, Dancing Without Feet, scholars spoke about amputating us at the knee. And all I will say to us Grenadians, let us stop amputating the economy by the knee. Ajamo sang a song he called Unity. A local unity could never be a disgrace. A local unity will open up freedom's gate. If we come together as a nation, if we stop pulling down each other, if we work together in the interest of nation building, we can take Grenada out of the misery that it now faces. Black Stalin, critical, well within the context of what we are talking about here today. Grenada, Grenada, the black man, thank you. Grenadians teach me my biggest lesson. They teach me capital communism, socialism. From time to time, you team up with them. Grenada, you're not on the losing, you have been on the losing end. My friend, got to stay away from them isms, because them ism is confusion. Those ism is just schism. So earlier when I mentioned all of those economic paradigms, important that we do not add up any of those things wholeheartedly. What we do, we extrapolate from them those things that we know can fit our circumstances, those things that we know are important in the context of our development, our strategy, our goals, etc., right? So those are, so to end, I just call it the next revolution. I'm back to another calypso by Gypsy called Where Do We Go From Here? And part of that calypso says, every day we look around, well, it's more confusion. They intensify without no solution. Helplessly, man stand in this wonderland, pondering his fate, some problems he creates. So I'm asking, where do we go from here? That's my questions to all mankind. Well, my questions to all Grenadians, where do we go from here? Where should we go from here? And the answer to that we'll take from the revolution and the experience of the revolution. One of the things that we must do, if we are to configure the Grenadian economy, is we must build an economy that is resilient. And the way to achieve resilience is through diversification. But I want to warn you, not across sector diversification. So you see those two graphs I showed you earlier, where we talk about the country having had some diversification over the years. Those two graphs were speaking to, well, they were illustrating what we call across sector diversification, meaning that you move from tourism to education, from education to agriculture and stuff like that. So you're moving across sector. That is not the discussion we want to be having in 2021, because that discussion leads us nowhere. What we want to be talking about is diversification within sectors. So what we want to do, take tourism, look at all the opportunities within tourism that we can exploit to make us more resilient. Take agriculture, look at all the opportunities within agriculture that we can exploit to make us more resilient. And talking about agriculture, there are two things I must say. One is that we have right now in Grenada a former Assistant Commissioner of Police, Trevor Modest, who is involved in agro-processing. And based on the discussion I would have had with him, he is on the right track in terms of what we need to do to help develop the agricultural sector in Grenada, how we take advantage of opportunities that exist within agriculture. So what I want to urge the Honorable Peter David as the Minister of Agriculture to do is to go sit down with Trevor and have a serious discussion as to how we could make this thing work. And that shouldn't be too difficult, because the Honorable Minister is a product of the revolution. So he should know how the revolution dealt with agriculture and what needs to be done in the current context. And all you need for this to work is a tripartite arrangement among ACP Modest, the Ministry of Agriculture, and the farmers. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel, because the FAO, Food and Agricultural Organization, they have on their website 100-something page document that speaks directly to that kind of tripartite arrangement among farmers, ministry, and investors. So they could use that as a template to forge that kind of relationship. And if they do, agriculture will begin to rebound. Within that concept as well, we used to produce in Grenada something called saltfish. Nice saltfish. Sparrow sang a song, a Grenadian, all saltfish sweet. Inspector sang a song, eating better. My question is, why then have we abandoned the production of a nice big fat saltfish that is sweet, or well, that was sweet and ate better? Why have we abandoned that? So these are things that we have to revisit. Secondly, building capital. And we have to build both human and social capital. And Peter, I don't have much time to deal with these. Human capital, just for clarity, that's an economic concept that was developed back in the 50s. Social capital is more recent, around the 80s, 90s, and that's a political concept. Now, I'm not going to talk about human capital, but let me say something quickly about social capital. It is critical. Social capital really speaks about interactions among humans and the kind of networking and stuff that we do. A lot of that happened during the revolution. But the important thing about social capital is that it is based on trust. And that word trust is crucial. So when your government tells you something, the question that you ask, do you trust your government? When your opposition tells you something, do you trust your opposition? If it's a pressure group in the society, when the pressure group says something, do you trust that pressure group? Because if we don't have that trust, nothing will happen. Nothing. So recently, our Prime Minister announced, I think it was something called a social fund or something like that, and he was asking people to make contributions. Simple. That project could build social capital in the country. But for it to work, Grenadians have to trust the Prime Minister. So do Grenadians trust the Prime Minister? If they do, they will invest in the fund. If they don't, they will not invest in the fund. So trust is important in building capital, social capital, in building out our economy from the present state in which it is. Embracing technocrats, locally, regionally, international. That is something that was huge in the revolution. They brought in technocrats from all over the place, Jamaica, Guyana, you name it, to help us build capacity, to help us drive forward the development choice of the revolution. That is important in the Grenadian context. Why is it important? Because we in Grenada always like to point to technicians, like to point to consultants, and say, look how much money government paying them. What's wrong with that? They are there to build capacity. If we build the capacity, if we work with the right relationship with them, we could benefit from what's called learning by doing. So our local experts could benefit from them. So let us get past the narrowness, the narrow-mindedness about how much you're paying a consultant or how much you're paying a technocrat, because that skill transfer is important in the context of human capital. Planning, huge. We had an architect in Grenada, a man named Bernard Code. Today I call him my mentor, my brother, my father. He's everything to me today, right? This man is an economic genius. And those who don't know that, well, take it from me today. He's the best economist we have ever produced, period. When you talk about planning, this man plans, well, let me not get into that, right? I'll just tell you a little secret. I went to Jamaica to visit him in 2005 or thereabouts. And I was staying in the same apartment as him because we were doing some work on the economics of the revolution, some books we are writing on the economics of the revolution. And when this gentleman sent me the plan, right, as to what is going to happen from the time I land on the airport at Normandy to get to him, I just had to marvel. I just had to marvel. Detailed stuff. Even in our conversation, sometimes I would send an email to him and say, you know, what do you think about this? And please don't be too detailed, just be brief. And the man will send back a brief thing that is 5, 6, 7 pages long. That just tells you the caliber of the man that we're dealing with. And it's a good thing we still have him around. Mass participation, people's involvement, well, that is crucial. We heard some of it before. We have to work together as a team. It can't be about the government. It can't be about the opposition. It can't be about an NGO by themselves. We all have to be in this together. That's the only how. Unity, as Ajamo said. That's how we'll get it across. Volunteerism, that was huge under the revolution. Just mobilize some people, get some cement, get some steel, and people in the community come together and they build roads. Simple, no big deal. We need to return to some of those. And the last point, why I call troublemakers. Not a bad term. Troublemakers is a concept that is found in the literature on utility regulations. And what a troublemaker is, simply someone who speaks for the voiceless. That's all a troublemaker is, someone who speaks for the voiceless. So everybody cannot write an article in Grenada today. Everybody cannot host a radio program. What it means, therefore, is that those who participate in those things, they should reflect the views of the masses. So if you are from a small village and you are going on to a radio program, for example, to talk about some issues affecting Grenada, have a chat with ordinary people in the village. Hear what they feel, hear what they think, hear what their views are, hear what their suggestions are. And then when you go on the program, you can represent. So that's it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brian Francis. Thank you very much for that insightful presentation. As some of the people in the chat said, we should really have a whole session only on the economy. Ruggles?
Yes, because I could not say most of what I wanted to say. So I only said about 10% of what I wanted to say. But I understand the time constraint.
Yeah. But thank you very much for this insightful information. Ruggles?
He needs to stop sharing. He needs to stop sharing now.
Yes. Brian needs to remove the share screen.
Yeah, I'm doing that now. Right, I've done.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Yes. Today we celebrate, mark the 42nd anniversary of the Grenada Revolution. Many have contributed to the making and the building of the Grenada Revolution. And as we sit here today and listen to the various speakers, and I have been following some of the comments in the chat, as one sister indicated, that we need to have more of these sessions to learn about the revolution, because when people think about the revolution, they think about guns. They think about the way the revolution ended. But the revolution was about changing the lives of people, changing the lives, improving the lives of the poor and vulnerable. We hear today about the Community School Day program, about people's participation, people connecting with the schools, about the Next Step program, as Dr. Hicklin indicated, unique in the world, not just in the Caribbean, but the training of our teachers. There was the school books and uniforms program. There was the school feeding program to feed hungry students. All of this happened during the revolution. And there are those who made selfless sacrifices to make it happen. And today we want to pay tribute to them. Many have passed on, some in very tragic circumstances, and we pay tribute to all of them today. So let me first invite young Aquino Romain, a young Grenadian poet, a teacher, and a poet, powerful poet. I must say, I remember his presentation in the Trade Center in 2016 when we had the inaugural March 13th lecture, and he literally rocked the place. Aquino?
All we wanted was better, a better plan for a better land. We just wanted better. But better ain't always easy. In fact, better is bittersweet. We know because we see it, we know because we feel it, we know because we live it, we know because we live in with the consequences of a bitter, sweet better. Better began when the bitter reality of the plantation was too much to bear. Better began when a little black boy from Dunfermline appeared, prepared to challenge the colonial order, shift the paradigm and rid our paradise of colonial parasites. If it's riot they want, then it's riot they go get. He tell us, paint the whole sky red. He say no more suffering, we want adult suffrage. Working class champion, working for better, not British. Who thought we would have witnessed better become bitter, bitter, bitter. Revered by one generation, feared by a next, they prepared nevertheless to seek redress for the distress caused at the hands of the dictator. Distress was the creator of a movement for improvement, be it constitutionally or forced removement, by any means necessary. All cards on the table, any option available, cause things bitter when it go get better. But things must bitter before it get better, better, better. And so, it was youth who were resolute in the pursuit of true betterment. Better meant improved infrastructure and healthcare, free education and welfare, self-help and self-care. Eat what you grow what you eat, less import and more industry, organization, grassroots representation, involvement of the masses, equality of classes, classes for the illiterate, empowerment for women, wealth for ourselves and our children's children. Better meant a battle for power. Like Fidel and Ernesto, we needed a revolution to manifest the manifesto. And on the morning of March 13, 1979, a voice echoed throughout the
Government of the criminal dictator Eric M. Berry has been process. The revolutionary government has been informed all religious rights and freedoms are now restored. The people's rights to right and private property are hereby restored. The new revolutionary government calls on all the people to defend the revolution.
All we wanted was better, a better plan. For a better land now, the popular opinion is that things much better than under Gary's administration. Improved healthcare and education, plus a massive stimulation of the agricultural sector. Now we producing juices and nectars. Women empowerment, maternity leave. We bought a bank for $1 and set up the national insurance scheme. Plus we construct the airport in Point Salines. In terms of foreign policy, non-alignment was our policy. Uncle Sam can't police we. Bishop say we in nobody's backyard and that is it. But idealism and geopolitics is two things that really do mix. So we seeing things one way and Uncle Sam seeing it a next. What we seen as betterment, he seen as a threat. He can't afford a next Cuba in the region. Now all of a sudden, democracy in season. And watch how the seasons change. The atmosphere on our revolutionary island changed too. It's funny what a little destabilization does do. Revolution breeds counter-revolution. Now counter-revolutionaries counting the blessing. Party split, Morris say no to joint leadership and get house arrested. And now all the time, money and energy invested in securing better, sliding slowly down the gutter. Things getting bitter, bitter, bitter. All we wanted was better. A better plan for a better land, but things too far gone. The damage has been done. Blood has been spilled and everything we built crumbling. It's like it count for nil. It's we who kill our revolution. Divided like factions, forming factions, but that was perfect ground for destabilization to take traction. Or maybe our experiment was bound to fail. Maybe our better was destined to be bitter. Because like Photoshop, we try to crop ourselves out the bigger picture. But things don't work so. High ambition, little resource, pit against Uncle Sam and his American force, regional heads in full support. I starting to contend this could have only end with a series of bitter events. All we wanted was better, but it's bullet flying left, right and center. Grenada at the center of international affairs, things appear more bitter than they have ever been. Bitter enough for Uncle Sam to intervene. It's bombs, and bombs for so. Bombs explode as the revolution implodes. Helicopters spitting fire. Tanks and troops swarm the road. Democracy must be restored. It didn't take long for revolutionaries to surrender and throw down arms. The place calm. It over. The bitterness over. The bloodshed over. And revolutionary soldiers in lockup. Freedom of speech restored, so all man want to talk up. He's a PRA. And he's a PRA too. People turning on their own people. All we wanted was better. And that is within our right to seek our own self-interest. All we wanted was better and to mind we business. All we wanted was better to control the life we live in. All we wanted was better. But better ain't always easy. We know because we live it. You think they crushed our revolution? They crush our spirit. Because now every time we hear better, the bitter is vivid. So now we get quite comfortable with our bitter living. Yeah, things bitter. When it go get better. But things must bitter before it get better, better, better.
Yes. Thank you, Aquino. And what follows is a tribute to our fallen soldiers, all who have contributed to the making and the building of the Grenada Revolution. Let me indicate that the list is not exhaustive. It is a work in progress, so there are many names that may be missing, and we invite for future activities like these, those who have identified missing names to send those missing names.
Yes, but today is the anniversary
so
of the
we can
Grenada
move
Revolution.
Forward and add to the names
for the
as
second
time
anniversary.
evolves. What unifies us? What unifies everybody from the revolutionary period is their willingness to sacrifice to make a difference, a positive difference in Grenadian society. So let me invite now the tribute to fallen soldiers, followed by a 1-minute silence as a mark of respect and tribute.
Yeah. Whoa. This is for my soldiers. Real soldiers. Yeah. This is for my fallen soldiers. We miss you. I know you can't, we with you. Can't on the battlefield. Life is so real. This is for my fallen soldiers. We miss you. I know you can't, we with you. Can't on the battlefield. Life is so real. Yeah. As a little youth used to hang up on the corner. Me and the one of my friend and we are on some marijuana. Although enough of we never grew up with no father. Still we have to try the best to make it cross the border. But some boy show them big like Hulk Hogan. Come and chat, tell them we no listen slogan. We prefer dead before we take program. We no grow wrong, no, we no business for our fallen soldiers. We miss you. I know you can't, we with you. Camp on the battlefield. Life is so real. This is for my fallen soldiers. We miss you. I know you can't, we with you. Camp on the battlefield. Life is so real. Yeah, enough of them not like we. Them know them wrong and still I take it fight we. Kill off a friend and think me take it lightly. And the whole I wanna boy me a free. Hey, when I want a more funeral, no more burial. Stop behaving like wild animals. Get more spiritual, get more biblical. I'm gonna take a wash off over the mineral. You save your soul, you save yourself. While you rest in peace, so tell Jah we need some help. Which one for the business for my fallen soldiers? We miss you. I know you can't, we with you. Camp on the battlefield. Life is so real. This is for my fallen soldiers. We miss you. I know you can't, we with you. Camp on the battlefield. Life is so real. Yeah. Whoa. This is for my soldiers. Real soldiers. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Whoa. This is for my soldiers. Real soldiers. Yeah, yeah. Whoa. This is for my soldiers. Real soldiers. Yeah. This is for my fallen soldiers. We miss you. I know you can't, we with you. Camp on the battlefield. Life is so real. This is for my fallen soldiers. We miss you. I know you can't, we with you. Camp on the battlefield. Life is so real. Yeah. As a little youth used to hang up on the corner. Me and the one of my friend and we up on some marijuana. Although enough of we never grew up with no father. Still we have to try the best to make it cross the border. But some boy show them big like Hulk Hogan. Come and chat, tell them we no listen slogan. We prefer dead before we take program. We no grow wrong, no, we no business for our fallen soldiers. We miss you. I know you can't, we with you. Camp on the battlefield. Life is so real. This is for my fallen soldiers. We miss you. I know you can't, we with you. Camp on the battlefield. Life is so real. Yeah. enough of them.
Can we have the minute silence?
Yes, they are there. You call them somewhere described. Institution, yeah, the institution runs the show. We need
May I ask that all mics be muted? Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And we now move this final stage of the program should be the interactive stage, which I indicated at the beginning. We had budgeted between 45 minutes to an hour. Regrettably, we have exceeded the time already by 50 minutes. And what we will therefore have to do is to cut the interactive, not exclude it, but reduce the time to about 15 minutes. There are several questions and comments raised, and therefore we will just highlight from each of the speakers, have them respond to at least one question before we move to wrap up.